This place was supposed to be my fresh start, a legacy left behind by Aunt Eleanor, the only person who ever truly believed in me. But as I stepped inside, my breath caught in my throat. The land wasn't the thriving estate I remembered from childhood. It was a graveyard. The vines, once lush, full of life, were nothing but twisted, brittle corpses. The trellises had collapsed, their wooden frames snapping like broken ribs. The air smelled of decay. Aunt Eleanor had spent her entire life pouring her soul into this vineyard. She built it from nothing, loved it, protected it. And now, this? I whispered into the emptiness, barely recognizing my own voice. This isn't an inheritance. It's a burial ground. The words felt bitter on my tongue. Something was wrong. Aunt Eleanor would never let this place rot away. And if the vineyard had been failing all along, then why did she insist on giving it to me? I could still hear their laughter in my head, the way Victor and Evelyn smirked when they heard about the will. A vineyard that hasn't turned a profit in a decade? Victor had chuckled, swirling a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand. Good luck, Elena. Evelyn didn't even pretend to hide her amusement. Oh, don't be so mean, darling. Maybe she can turn it into a petting zoo. The way they dismissed it. The way they let me have it without a fight. It didn't make sense. Victor had never been the kind of man to walk away from money. But this time, he didn't argue, didn't demand his share. He just let me have it. My stomach twisted. Since when did Victor not fight for money? They weren't just uninterested. They were smug, and that scared me more than anything. If they truly thought this vineyard was worthless, why did they look so damn pleased? The silence inside the estate felt unnatural. No workers, no deliveries, no sign that this vineyard had ever been alive. I ran my hand along the dusty desk in Eleanor's old office, my fingertips catching on something jagged. I pulled open a drawer. Financial records, except the pages were torn. Some burned. Entire sections were missing. I flipped through them, my pulse quickening. Who hides financial records unless they have something to hide? I stepped into the storage room. Empty. The expensive wine barrels that should have lined the walls were gone. I swallowed hard. This wasn't just an abandoned vineyard. Someone had erased its past. On purpose. And then I saw it, tucked in the corner of a forgotten shelf. A single bottle. It was covered in dust, the label faded, but I knew exactly what it was. Eleanor's Reserve, the signature wine my aunt spent years perfecting. The wine that was supposed to have stopped production years ago. Hand trembled as I picked it up. The glass felt cold. Unsettling. This bottle shouldn't exist. I turned it over, my breath catching in my throat. There, scratched into the glass, were two familiar letters. E. Eleanor's initials. A message. Meant only for me. I could barely breathe. If this bottle was here. That meant the vineyard wasn't really failing. That meant someone had been lying to me, and I already knew who. Victor. Evelyn. They never wanted me to inherit a vineyard. They wanted me to inherit a failure. I clenched my fists, my pulse roaring in my ears. If there was one bottle left, how many more were hidden beneath the surface? I stood in the middle of the vineyard, the wind whispering secrets through the hollowed trellises. The land felt wrong. I'd spent enough summers here as a child to know what this place was supposed to be. A legacy, a labor of love. And yet it stood before me like a corpse, drained of its lifeblood. Something was missing. No, something was hidden. My feet carried me down the winding path, past the crumbling estate, past the old workshed, until I reached the farthest edge of the vineyard. That's when I saw it. A half-rotted barn, barely clinging to its foundation, swallowed by creeping ivy. I shouldn't have noticed it. That's the thing about secrets. They're meant to stay buried. But I did notice. And as I stepped forward, the unease in my stomach twisted into something colder. The dirt was undisturbed, the wooden planks warped with time. Everything about it screamed abandonment, except for one thing. Boot prints. Fresh ones. A chill crept up my spine. Someone had been here recently. I moved carefully, brushing away the debris near the barn's entrance. Something shifted beneath my fingertips. A set of old crates stacked haphazardly. My pulse quickened. With a sharp inhale, I heaved them aside, and then I saw it. A door. A cellar door. The wood was splintered, the rusted lock recently forced, open. From the inside. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to turn back, to walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen it. But that wasn't an option, was it? Not anymore. I gripped the handle and pulled. The scent of damp earth and aged oak filled my lungs as I descended into the darkness below. The lantern flickered in my grip, casting long shadows against the stone walls. The air was thick, stagnant, untouched by time. Except this place wasn't untouched, was it? My light swept across the room. At first, it seemed empty, just another forgotten storage space buried beneath the vineyard. But then I saw them. Rows of wine bottles, hundreds of them. My breath hitched. Eleanor's signature reserve. The same wine that was supposed to have ceased production years ago. The same wine I had been told was impossible to make, impossible to sell, impossible to save. And yet, here it was. My hands trembled as I traced the dust-covered labels. Every crate was stamped for export. France, Italy, the highest-end markets. Swallowed hard. The vineyard wasn't failing. It had never failed. Victor and Evelyn. They lied. They never let the vineyard die. They stole it. A rustling sound made my heart leap, but it was just me. My own shaky breath, my pulse roaring in my ears. I braced myself, inhaled sharply, and stepped further inside. Then I saw it. A ledger. Reached for it, fingers curling around the aged leather cover. When I flipped it open, my stomach clenched. Shipment logs, export records, years' worth of transactions. Every page screamed the truth I had been too blind to see. Victor's signature. Evelyn's, over and over. All this time they had made me believe I was a fool, that this place was nothing but a burden, that my aunt had left me something worthless. They didn't just steal money. They stole my faith in her, in myself. I clenched the book so hard my knuckles turned white. The laughter, the dismissive pats on the head, the smug glances when I mentioned trying to rebuild the vineyard. It had never been pity. It had been amusement. They wanted me to fail. They wanted me to walk away. Because if I walked away, I'd never find this. A glint of light caught my eye. Something wedged between the barrels, half hidden beneath old cloth. I reached for it, heart hammering. An envelope. My breath caught. My aunt's handwriting. I hesitated, my fingers tracing the ink. Then, with a deep breath, I broke the seal and unfolded the letter. If you found this, it means the vineyard's truth is in your hands now. My throat tightened. I forced myself to read on. I tried to stop them, Elena. But they were always one step ahead. They took everything they could, piece by piece, until I had nothing left to fight with. They didn't want you to inherit a vineyard. They wanted you to inherit a failure. I swallowed against the lump forming in my throat. They wanted you broken enough to walk away without a fight. My chest constricted. The weight of her words settled deep in my bones. She knew. She knew. And she couldn't stop. Them. My hands trembled as I read the final line. Do not let them win. A slow exhale left my lips. The pain inside me didn't fade, but something shifted. Hardened. This wasn't grief anymore. This was something else. I glanced at the ledger, then back at the letter. The proof of their betrayal, their deception, their arrogance. Right here, in my hands. They thought I would never find out. They were wrong. I climbed out of the cellar, my breath steady, my grip firm around the ledger. The vineyard stretched before me, bathed in cold moonlight. For years they had stolen from me in plain sight. They had mocked me, manipulated me, and twisted the truth until I believed their lies. But they made one mistake. They underestimated me. I wasn't walking away. Not this time. I took one last look at the vineyard, the legacy they tried to bury. Then, in a whisper, I sealed their fate. It's my turn now. The moment I signed my surrender was the moment I started my war. Victor thought he had won. Evelyn smirked at my silence, the same condescending smirk she had worn my entire life. To them, I was weak, beaten, a foolish girl finally accepting her place beneath their boots. The vineyard is worthless, Elena. Victor sighed, patting my shoulder like I was a child too naive to understand the ways of the world. You're better off letting it go. It's done. I forced a small, shaky smile, eyes downcast, hands trembling just enough to make it believable. Let them think I was broken. Let them feel victorious. You're right, I murmured, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't have it in me to fight anymore. Victor's hand lingered a second longer, triumphant. Evelyn exhaled a satisfied breath. Smart girl, she muttered. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. My fingers curled into a fist behind my back, nails pressing into my palm. Pain kept me grounded, focused. Because they had no idea what was coming. They celebrated too soon. By the time Victor and Evelyn retired to their estate, gloating over their inevitable victory, I was already setting the next stage. Eleanor's records weren't just dusty old files. They were a map, a list of names, allies long forgotten, but not by me. I found one quickly. Michael Carver, the wine distributor who once swore loyalty to my aunt. His name sat in the old ledgers, a faint echo of a time before Victor's greed. I called him. He answered on the first ring. Elena? His voice carried cautious surprise. I haven't heard from your family in years. I'm not my family, I replied, and I need your help. Silence stretched between us before he spoke again. If this is about the vineyard, it's not dead, I cut in. Victor lied. He buried it alive. Another pause. Then a quiet chuckle. Tell me what you need. And just like that, the first shipment left the vineyard under moonlight. Barrels filled with the very wine Victor and Evelyn thought had turned to dust. The first deal was small. A test. But when the payment arrived, crisp and undeniable, I knew it had begun. They thought the vineyard was a corpse. They never checked its pulse. Victor never saw them coming. The workers he discarded, the investors he scorned, the people he used and threw away, they all answered my call. You're serious? Marta, my aunt's former vineyard manager, stared at me. As a funeral, I said. His. She let out a slow breath, nodding. You have my loyalty. You always did. One by one they returned, quietly, strategically. No one spoke, a word to the outside world. The vineyard hummed with new life beneath the surface, a beast stirring, waiting for the right moment to rise. And Victor? He remained blissfully ignorant, until I fed him the bait. It started as a whisper, a rumor slithering through the town, carefully planted in the right ears. Elena's desperate to sell. I let it fester, let it grow, made sure Victor and Evelyn heard it from multiple sources, each one more convincing than the last. And just like that, they took the bait. "She's drowning," Evelyn scoffed, swirling her wine glass. "Let's throw her an anchor." Victor smirked. "She'll take whatever she can get." I did nothing to deny it. I let them believe it. Meanwhile, the Vineyard's books, recently and conveniently leaked to key officials, began painting a very different story. Victor didn't know it yet. But he was about to sign his own downfall. The first crack in his armor came quietly. A name whispered at a dinner party. A hushed conversation in a hallway. A glance exchanged between business partners, uncertain, wary. Victor noticed. "Why are people asking about my financials?" He barked at Evelyn one evening. She dismissed it with a wave of her hand, but I saw the way her fingers clenched the stem of her glass. The first hint of unease. Good. I watched from the sidelines, silent, unreadable. The shadows were closing in, and Victor was running out of time. Then came his final move. A contract, thrust onto the table in front of me. Crisp. Legal. Final. "This is your last chance, Elena." Victor's voice was steady, but I saw the tension in his jaw. "Sign it, and at least you'll walk away with something." I stared at the paper, held the pen between my fingers, a moment too long, just enough for him to believe he had won. I lifted my eyes, and I smiled. Victor's confidence wavered, just for a second. Then, I placed the recorder on the table, pressed play, and his own voice filled the room. Confessing, mocking, laughing at my supposed stupidity, detailing every stolen cent, every forged signature, every lie. Evelyn went pale. Victor stumbled back, his mouth opening, closing, no words. I leaned in, my voice barely a whisper. Game. Over. The air inside the auction hall is thick with wealth and arrogance, a place where fortunes are made with a single bid. Chandeliers cast golden light over the city's elite. Men in tailored suits, women in diamond-studded gowns, all gathered. For one thing, wine. Expensive, exclusive, legendary wine, and at the center of it all, Victor. He stands tall, his presence commanding, his voice smooth as silk as he welcomes the crowd. His smile is a performance, his charm rehearsed. He believes he owns this night. He believes he owns everything. I watch from the sidelines, my heart steady, my expression unreadable. He doesn't see me yet. He doesn't know. But tonight is mine. The auctioneer steps forward. Ladies and gentlemen, we begin with an extraordinary offering, an exclusive vintage from the late Eleanor Moreau's collection, once thought to be lost forever. Gasps ripple through the crowd. Eleanor's wine, my aunt's legacy, the very thing Victor swore had been destroyed in a fire. Victor's smile doesn't falter, but I see it, the flicker of confusion in his eyes. I step forward, slowly, deliberately. That's interesting, I say, loud enough for the room to hush. Considering that particular collection was never lost, just stolen. The words land like a slap. The murmurs begin, heads turning toward me. But I don't stop. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce the truth. Victor stiffens. Elena, I don't know what, but I raise a hand, silencing him. Not anymore. Not tonight. A screen flickers too. Life behind me. Footage rolls. A hidden cellar untouched by fire. Rows upon rows of barrels, filled with wine that Victor claimed had been reduced to ashes. The room erupts. "This is impossible," someone whispers. Victor's mask slips, just for a second. A tightening around his jaw, a twitch in his fingers. Turn toward the crowd, my voice unwavering. "For years, Victor Moreau lied to you. He claimed the vineyard was dying, that Eleanor's finest wines had been lost. But as you can see," I gesture to the screen, "that was never true. He hoarded them, lied to investors, falsified financial records." Gasps turn into outrage. Journalists scramble for their cameras. Investors exchange sharp glances. Victor steps forward, his voice laced with desperation. "This is slander, a misunderstanding at best. But I'm already holding up the final piece of my game, the documents, the missing financial records that detail everything. Years of fraud, embezzlement, stolen profits." A deadly silence fills the hall as I drop them onto the auctioneer's podium. "Misunderstanding?" My voice is cold. "Would you care to explain these, then?" Victor's face drains of color. The investors move first, their patience snapping. "You lied to us. You stole from us." A government official stands. "I believe we'll be taking this further." Victor staggers back. Evelyn grips his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "Do something," she hisses. But there's nothing he can do. His empire crumbles before his eyes. The hall is chaos. Accusations fly. Reporters fire questions. Investors pull out, furious. Officials murmur about frozen assets, criminal charges. Victor looks around, wild-eyed. Then he turns to me. "Elena," he breathes, stepping forward. "Please, we can fix this." His voice cracks, stripped of all its arrogance. "I can make it right. Just talk to me." I stare at him. This man, who stole, who manipulated, who left me with nothing, and now he's begging. "You already lost," I say simply. His fingers tighten around my wrist, desperation in his grip. But I don't flinch. I don't cower. I simply smile. "You know," I whisper, leaning in just enough for only him to hear. "I used to wonder what it felt like, to be powerless, to watch everything slip through your fingers." I tilt my head. "Do you feel it now?" He trembles. His hand falls away. And then, the final piece of his world collapses. Every asset he stole, gone. His mansion, sold. His cars, auctioned. His money, seized. Evelyn sobs as officials take her away. Victor, once untouchable, falls to his knees. And me? I step closer, just enough to watch his last shred of dignity crumble. "The vineyard," I say, my voice like steel. "Every cent you stole goes back to it." His eyes widen. No mercy. No redemption. Just justice. Days pass, and the vineyard breathes again. Workers return, hope in their eyes. The land, once suffocated by Victor's greed, thrives under my hands. Bottles of Eleanor's reserve sell out instantly. Investors flood in, eager to support its revival. My revival. And as the sun sets over golden fields, I stand at the balcony of what was once my prison. Now my empire. A glass of wine in hand. The same wine Victor swore would never see the light of day. I lift it slowly, my heart steady, my soul free. "To justice," I whisper, "and to Eleanor." And then, I take a sip. The war was over, but the echoes of betrayal still whispered through the vines. I stood on the balcony of the estate, watching the vineyard stretch before me, golden under the setting sun. Eleanor's reserve, once stolen, nearly destroyed, now flourished, reborn, from the ashes of deception. Investors lined up at my door, eager to attach their names to the legacy that Victor had tried to erase. I should have felt triumphant. But as I traced my fingers along the railing, a cold truth settled in my bones. Winning didn't erase the scars. In the distance, beyond the estate gates, Victor and Evelyn faded into obscurity. No more lavish parties, no more stolen fortunes. Just two forgotten ghosts, trapped in the ruins of their own arrogance. They used to rule with unchecked power. Now, they existed as mere shadows of themselves, unrecognizable, pitiful. Victor had aged overnight, his once proud posture now hunched with defeat. His name, once a symbol of wealth and prestige, was nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered among the elite. Evelyn, stripped of her diamonds and designer dresses, clung to the remnants of a world that no longer belonged to her. And yet, I knew the sting of my justice still burned in their chests. Let them feel it. Let them rot in the silence they so cruelly forced upon me. The vineyard was mine now, not stolen, not borrowed, earned. I walked through the fields, feeling the life pulsing through the land Eleanor had built. Workers moved with renewed purpose, their laughter blending with the rustling leaves. The vines stood strong, unyielding, just like me. A bottle of Eleanor's Reserve was uncorked that evening, its rich aroma filling the air. The first in years, a tribute to the woman who had started it all. But as the wine poured, something inside me remained unsettled. The revenge was complete. The empire was mine. The betrayers had fallen. And yet, I still carried the weight of it all. I stood among the vines that night, the wind whispering through the leaves, carrying voices from the past. Victor's lies, Evelyn's cruelty. The years they stole from me had justice, but justice didn't erase the pain. Did I win? I murmured into the night. Or did I just survive? The answer didn't come. Instead, I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of the vineyard, the legacy I had fought for. I did it, I whispered. Not to myself, but to Eleanor. For the first time in years, I felt her presence, not in the weight of my grief, but in the strength of what I had built. The wind stirred, as if answering, as if acknowledging everything I had endured, and in that moment, I let go. Not of the past, not of the pain, but of the part of me that had been waiting for an apology that would never come. They took everything from me once, but I built myself back, up stronger than before.